All right. That was weird. So for some reason, my other link didn't work. If you can see me, if this one's working, go ahead and say hey in the chat there. Might have to refresh my channel. Okay. Let me add a new link. Okay, let me see. See if this will work. Nothing's ever easy, I'm telling you. Let me see if I can share this one out. Okay, hold on. Stand by. Okay, copy that. We're gonna toss this in the chat. Okay. Hopefully that worked. I tried to schedule the stream, and apparently that didn't work. It didn't want to work, so that's kind of annoying. What did we? Okay. So we're gonna get started here in a second. I just want to make sure that everyone found the link that's here. It looks like okay. I got more people in. Okay, so if you if that link isn't working, I guess I'll have to send out. I'll have to put this in Google Classroom for other people. So just give me one quick second so that everyone's got a shot at it. And then we'll get started. So I usually stay on for about an hour, but this one is actually a pretty short test. So this one could, I'd say, probably be about anywhere between a half hour and 45 minutes. Let me see. Sorry, I can't do two things at once. You guys know this already. All right, we'll add that. Okay, here is the new working link. There we go. All right, so that's my Google Classroom, and I know Ms. Fitzgerald, Mrs. Wiesner might be popping in as well. So if you want to pass that along to your Google Classrooms, that link should work now. So sorry about that, everybody. Hopefully the quality is okay. Sorry about the shaky cam. So we'll go ahead and get started. And again, this is totally optional. This is not something that you have to do. So you're taking time out of your night to improve your mathematical skills with circles. So that's commendable. And remember, if you're having any trouble with watching the stream, it does save at the end. So you can watch it after it's over. And I see people in the chat are letting other people know that the link is in Google Classroom. So you can get that link there as well. I'll put it in the chat one more time too, just so people are able to get to it. So I'm gonna go a different route next time. I tried to schedule a stream this time, so it gave you a link to one that's not working. So that is my bad. It's been about 4 months since my last live stream, so things are a little shaky at the moment. So a couple things we're gonna go over tonight. I had, oh my gosh, hold on. All right. I have notes of what we're gonna go over here. So. All right, the number just jumped up, so it looks like people have found it now, so that's great. Keep in mind, too, we do have students from green and red joining us, as well as blue. So all three teams do have access to this. And again, video saves after, so if you miss something or if I go too fast, you can always go back and replay it. I will try to answer as many questions as I can, but I can only see about 4 comments at a time, and those are one-liners. So do me a big favor, don't spam the chat, because then I'll miss questions or I might miss important things that you need to know. So I told that to my classes, so if you're joining me from another class, again, just make sure you're not spamming the chat. Make sure you're being appropriate, because the chat does save after. Don't use it as your own personal chat room afterwards. I had a couple students do that last year. Didn't realize that we all could see that even though the chat was over. So these are things just to keep in mind. And same with your appropriate use policy for the, when you use a piece of technology for the district, you have to sign an appropriate use contract. So just make sure you follow those things on here as well. So if you wouldn't type it and post it in Google Classroom, I wouldn't do it there. Okay, so again, the purpose tonight is to go over we're going over different parts of circles and using the 2 formulas that you learned for circumference and area. So that's what we're going to go over tonight. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to talk really quick about the parts of a circle. Okay, and I drew a circle up here to the best of my ability. Okay, so we name a circle by its center. So whatever the center point is, that's how we name the circle. Okay, so if the middle point here is Q, we would call this circle Q. Okay, so this vocabulary is important. just to know what the questions on the test are asking you. So pay close attention to the different parts of the circle we're talking about. And we should know these by now, but again, that's why we're reviewing this. So, so again, Q is my center. So my circle is called circle Q. All right. And what I have on here in purple, we identify this as a radius, okay, because it goes from the center point of the circle to the edge of the circle, okay? And you can have infinite number of radii. Radii is the plural of radius. Okay, and again, they extend from the center of the circle to the edge of the circle, okay? And this distance is the same all the way around the circle, so it's even, which is, again, how we get a circle, okay? There's also a line that stretches from one edge of the circle to the other, but it also must pass through the center point, okay? And we call this D for diameter, all right? So just talking about what our variables mean, R means radius, okay? And D means diameter, okay? So again, these are things we should know from class, all right? So our capital letters, we're gonna move into those next, but we wanna make sure we understand whether we're dealing with a diameter or a radius, because that's gonna determine how we use these formulas. So thanks, Ms. Fitzgerald, for passing that link along, appreciate that. So, man, I got 36 viewers, it's good, it's good stuff. All right, so we've talked about the diameter of the circle. It bisects the circle, cuts it in half, and goes from one edge of the circle to the other while also passing through the center point. And then we have a radius, which goes from the center point to the edge of the circle, and we can have infinitely many of those, and then we can have infinitely as many diameters as we want to draw, as long as we follow those rules. So the capital C, okay, I don't need this anymore. Capital C in these formulas, this refers to circumference, okay? Circumference, okay? And circumference, as you know from class, is the distance around the circle, okay? So this is our circumference, okay? Again, the distance around the circle. So if I were to take this circle, okay, if I were to take this circle now to unfold it into a straight line and then measure the length of that line, that would be my circumference, okay? So I'm measuring the line around the circle, all right? And that's what this formula you learned in class is gonna do, so we'll go over that again. And then the last variable or letter we're going to talk about is the capital A, and this is for area, okay? So area refers to how much space this circle takes up, okay? And we're going to refer to other area formulas to get you familiar with how to use area with a circle, okay? Hey, how do you find the area of a circle when only given the circumference? Well, I have good news for you. You have to do that on Mathia, and if you use Khan Academy in your class, you have to do that on Khan Academy, but you do not have to do that on your test, okay? So I'm not going to focus on that too much. I might touch on that at the end, but that's not something that you're going to be tested on. But it is a good skill to know, because if you can go from circumference all the way to area, that shows that you really understand both of these formulas backwards and forwards. So we will talk about that at the end, because I know that might be stumping some of you on Mathia. So, so what we're going to do is, again, the area refers to the area inside the circle, how much space it takes up, okay? Whereas the circumference talks about the distance around the circle. So when you're asked a question on your test, you want to make sure that you know what you're being asked to do so that you use the correct formula, okay? So I've given these steps to my students, and I want to refresh those as well. And I'm sure that if your teacher is Mrs. Wiesner or Ms. Fitzgerald, I'm sure that they've had similar steps. So here's the steps that I give my students whenever we're solving a problem involving circles, involving anything that involves a formula, okay? So step one, I tell my students to identify the formula, okay? So that means identify the formula you need, okay? And this seemed kind of silly in my class at first because we were only doing circumference. So they were like, well, we're doing circumference, so we use circumference. Okay, so if a problem asks you about the distance around the circle, you have to identify that you would need the circumference formula. If a problem asks you about how much space the circle occupies, or how much space, or how much you would need to fill it up, how much area is covered, well, then there's big keywords there that would tell you would need area, okay? So the formulas are actually going to be given to you on your test, okay? Anytime you take a standardized test, even in college, when I took some math classes in college, I was given a formula card. So, or I was able to have one myself. I had to prepare, but that being said, that's what we're going to do on your test as well. So the formulas will actually be provided for you, but the thing that you need to do is know which one is which and which one you would use when. And that's the purpose of what we're doing tonight. So again, identifying the formula you need is key. All right. Second, all right, and equally as important, is write the formula down. So write the formula down. Okay, write down the formula. I'm saying it differently than I'm writing it. And sorry, I'm writing on an angle here. So we write down the formula every single time, okay? And that's because once we know which formula we need to write that formula down to make sure that we're putting things in the right place, okay? So our third step is going to be plug in what you know, okay? So, and I hope you have these in your notes. If you don't, I would add them. So plug in what you know. Forgive my bad handwriting, okay? So plugging in what you know means if they give you the radius and you're using a formula that has r in it, then during this step, you would replace r with the number you're given. Some of you were talking about how they give you circumference, but not anything else. So in that case, when they give you the answer, you'd have to plug in circumference and then find the radius, okay? And then the last step would be, I always tell my students to solve what you can. Okay, solve what you can, all right? So solving what you can means if, let's say I have 2, I have pi, and let's say my r is 6, okay? So I'm just gonna replace this for a second. Let's say my r is 6. Well, I can multiply in any order. So solving what I can now would be, well, I'm going to do 2 times 6, which is 12, and then I'll times that by pi. I tell my students to do that because then you have less of a chance of making a mistake when you plug something into the calculator. So you want to do as much as you can without the help of a calculator, and then use the calculator to be more efficient with your time, but then also to ensure that you don't make a silly mistake on the calculator. So solve what you can, and then the last step is isolate the variable, okay? So what I mean by isolate the variable, when you isolate something, it means you put it by itself, okay? So when one of my fish in here, say on my fish tank, when one of my fish is sick, I don't want my other fish to get infected, so I remove that fish and I put it in a quarantine tank and I treat it with medications and I get that fish to be better. I have to put it in isolation, okay? So that was just on my mind because I've had to do that recently. I switched to salt water, kind of proud of it, so here we are, new setup. This looks probably pretty cool from your end, but I think from the street I probably look crazy, so, you know, so. But anyway, so your last step is going to be isolate the variable. Okay, so that means you want to get the variable by itself. In this case, if I'm given r, okay, c and a, they're already by themselves in this formula. Okay, but I know that some of you on Mathia might be running into situations where they give you the area but not the radius, and you have to find it, and that's where that comes in handy. Okay, but for the purpose of your test, this step 5 is probably gonna sort itself out already. Okay, so hopefully you have these steps. And these steps are very important for what we're going to do tonight when we find the area and the circumference of a circle, okay? So before we dive into problems involving area, we're going to start with circumference, okay? And then we're going to talk about area. We're going to talk again about why the area formula works. And, you know, like I said, hopefully we'll try to move this along at a decent pace. And I see there might be some questions popping up. Can you use a calculator on the test? Yes, you can. So you will be allowed to use a calculator. So that's good to know. But again, I would prefer that you do as much as you can without the calculator and then use the calculator to get your final answer if it involves pi 3.14, okay? So let's start with circumference, okay? So, and I'm going to go by these steps. And again, I'm going to do these problems. So I'd like you to do them with me. I'm just going to erase the whole circle. So here we go. We're gonna Dr. Strange sling ring it here. There we go. That's how you get a decent circle, is you kind of air draw it and then you put it to the paper, okay? So let's say we're told we need to find the circumference of a circle and the radius is, we'll say 4, okay? So this is all the information we're given. We're given a circle, the radius is 4, and you have to find the circumference, okay? So we're being asked about circumference right now. So that means I need to identify the formula I need, which is the circumference formula, okay? And I'm going to write that formula down. I know I need it. So I'm going to write down C equals 2 pi r. Okay, I didn't plug that number in yet. I wrote down the formula as it is so that I can kind of get everything set up straight. Okay, my next step is I'm going to plug in what I know. Okay, I don't know C. Okay, so I got to keep that variable. I know the 2 and the pi from the formula. And now I know r, which is 4. Okay, and actually I'm going to label this as 4 meters. Okay. So, and by the way, I see that some of you have questions and maybe I'm missing them because, like I said, I can only see so much of the chat. But if you can actually reply to someone else in the chat. So if you know the answer, be a good student and reply to other people in the chat if you know the answer to their question. Make sure you're giving them good information though. So, all right, but back to our problem here. So again, circle gave me 4 for the radius. I know I need circumference, and I use the circumference formula. I plug in what I know. So these are all the things from the formula that I keep, and then I replace r with 4 because that's the only new information I'm given. All right. Now, step 4 says to solve what you can. All right. So again, when we're multiplying, I can multiply in any order. So I'm going to multiply the 2 times the 4 because I used to teach 4th grade, so I know my multiplication facts, and my 4th graders should too. So I know that I can knock out 2 times 4. Okay, so that's going to equal 8, and I'll bring down the pi. Okay, and I can go no further without a calculator. I mean, I could, but you're given a calculator, so you may as well use it. So I've got my handy dandy calculator right here. So I'm going to do 3.14 because that's what we're using for pi. Remember that pi is about 3.14. And so I've asked my students to use that version of pi for the things that we're going to do in 7th grade. Okay, so when you see pi, you can multiply by 3.14. We're going to times that by 8. And our answer here for circumference is going to be 25.12. And my unit is meters, and we're going to do meters. Okay, now for circumference, remember, it's a linear measurement. We're measuring the length of the circle if you were to lay the circle out into a straight line. Okay, so it's only one dimension. So I would just put 25.12 meters. Okay, so I only put the m, and we'll talk about when to use the m2 later. Okay, so this is a basic circumference question. You're given the radius, you plug it in the formula, and then you just calculate all the way down. Okay. Now, there's been some situations where I've had some students get a little confused. I lost my eraser. Where'd that go? Oh, there we go. All right. So some of my students have gotten a little bit confused when they're given diameter, okay? And we have to remember, when we're finding the circumference, that there are 2 different forms for this formula, okay? We have 2 pi r, okay? The reason we have 2 pi r, okay, is because we learned on the first day we started circles that we take the diameter and multiply it by pi. So here was our original equation, diameter times pi. Okay, so if I have a diameter, okay, and again, that must go all the way across the circle through the center point. Okay, let's say my diameter is 9. Okay, so we can use this version, diameter times pi, because we learned that if we were to take the length of the diameter and lay it on the edge of the circle, okay, we would be able to do that 1, 2, 3, and then just a little smidge of a diameter, which is actually 0.14. Okay, so we know that the ratio of diameters to circumference is 3.14 times. So the circumference is always 3.14-ish times the diameter, which we call pi. Okay, so diameter times pi will always get you circumference. All right, now that being said, we know that this formula comes from this formula because we have 2 radius here, right? The diameter goes all the way across, but we still have a radius here and a radius here. So we can take 2 times the radius and multiply that by pi. So that's why there's 2 different forms of this same formula. So which one you use is going to depend on what information you're given. So again, we're doing circumference. I lost that cap. That's gone. We're doing circumference. Okay, I've been asked to find the circumference of this circle given the diameter is 9. Okay, so I identified the formula I need, which I'm being asked about circumference. So I'm going to use the circumference formula. Okay, and I'm going to use the one involving diameter because I'm given the diameter. So that's going to make things a lot easier. Okay, and then I've written down the formula. I plug in what I know. In this case, I know the diameter. All right, and I'm going to multiply that by pi. Okay, so all I'm going to do is take 9, times it by 3.14. Okay, and I'm doing that in my calculator. Okay, sorry about the glare. There we go, that's a little better. All right, and my circumference ends up equaling 28.26, and we'll say inches over here, so we'll say inches here. Okay, so I'll give it a unit. All right, so all we're doing for this test, well, not all of it, but a lot of what you're doing in this test is figuring out which formula you need, plugging in the information you have, and then calculating an answer. Okay, and so we've been doing this for years in different forms. Now we're just doing it with circles. Okay, what is he saying? I got the whole wheel of. Oh no, bummer. Sorry if I'm missing the questions here. Like I said, the chat. Usually I can see more lines of the chat, so I'm gonna just zoom through and see if there's any questions about what I said about circumference. What does the second one say? Okay. Oh, good. And I forgot. I've got Miss Fitzgerald in here helping me out too. So Miss Fitzgerald is actually in the chat, so she can actually answer questions as well. So if you have a question and I don't get to it, Ms. Fitzgerald, definitely a very credible source to get an answer from as well. So I can see on here that you can actually, if you click on the double arrows, you can reply directly to people that are asking questions. So that's very helpful too. So there's two examples of circumference, one involving a radius, one involving diameter. So again, if you want to see those again, you can always, when the video saves, go back to this part in the video and watch it again. So I do timestamp my videos as best I can. So I'll try to do that for you guys after this video. So that's two examples of using the circumference formula. So let's talk about area. Okay, I talked about where the circumference formula comes from. It's a ratio of diameter to the circumference. Okay, and we know that that ratio is pi. Okay, the circumference of a circle is always 3.14 times the diameter. All right, so that's where this formula comes from. But let's start talking about where area comes from, because I think that one's a little bit more confusing. All right, so I'm going to erase this. Okay, we know that R is radius and D is diameter. Okay, so let me get my circle going there. There we go. That's a little lumpy, but it'll do. All right, so we got our circle. I'm going to draw another radius just for now. Okay, and we are going to talk about how to use the area formula and what it means. Okay, so in class, one activity that we did, and I think the other teachers did something like it, is you can cut a circle into smaller pieces. Okay, and this is where the area formula comes from. Okay, I can cut the circle. Let's say I cut it into fourths. Okay, if I were to try to lay these out, okay, and try to set them end to end here, okay. I could take these 4 slices and lay them out like this, right? And the reason we do that is we're trying to get this circle to look as close to a rectangle or a parallelogram as we can, okay? And the reason we do that is because we already know the area. We'll just use a rectangle, okay? The area of a rectangle, you know, as length times width. You were probably taught that when you were younger. I know in 4th grade I taught area models with multiplication tables. So you were probably taught the length times the width. Okay, but we can call this something else, and we use this often in geometry. Okay, we say the length of the base times the height. Okay, so same idea, length times width, but I'm just calling it base times height. Okay, so we can associate the base and the height of a rectangle with the area of a circle. Okay, now obviously I can't calculate the base and the height of this because that does not look like a rectangle. There's not a whole lot I can do with that. So one option I have is I could cut this circle again, okay? I can cut it like this, all right? And I can get smaller slices, all right? So I get, maybe they look like this. Pardon my bad drawing and handwriting. So I get little, or I'm gonna draw this bigger. What am I doing? I got a whole whiteboard. Let's use the whole thing. So here, there we go, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I got this, here we go. There we go. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm taking a shortcut here. All right, so let's say I lay these 8 slices and I alternate where the rounded edges are. All right, and I'm getting closer to a rectangle, but I'm not quite there yet. So I could, again, cut these maybe into 16ths. Okay, I gotta make sure I do this right. So there, 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 there. All right, so, and again, I could get closer and closer, and eventually I could cut these, as we saw in a video in my class, I could cut these so small that eventually there's teeny tiny little slivers that I could just line up perfectly, okay? And there'd be so many slices that this whole rectangle would just look like, would just be red with slices, okay? So eventually I can cut this circle and lay the pieces out to the point where they are almost a perfect rectangle, okay? So if you look at this edge of the circle, okay, and I'll redraw my circle now that I've destroyed it. My eraser, I can never keep anything. Here it is. There we go. Okay. So let me see. There we go. All right. So here's my circle. Okay. Guess the rest of my family's home. So again, I can cut this circle infinitely many times to get really tiny slivers, and I can stack them into a rectangle. Okay. And the edge here is still the same edge here. Okay. And if we were to cut this circle, okay, we would be referring to a radius here. Well, this is the radius right there of the circle, okay? So the height of the rectangle, okay, we can say is the radius of this circle, because there it is right there when I line these pie pieces together, okay? What kind of dog do you have? I have an American Eskimo. One is mine, and the other one is my mother and father-in-law's, and she's visiting right now. But anyway, I digress. So the radius would be the side, okay? So we could say that height equals radius, okay? But then if we look at this edge, okay, and we wonder, where does this edge come from? Okay, well, the one thing that my class told me is that the edge of the circle is here and here, okay? So I have half the circumference up here, and I have the other half of the circumference up here, right? Okay, because there's the rounded edge, and again, the more I cut it, the less round it becomes, but still, nonetheless, the circumference is right here. Okay, really, this is 1/2 of the circumference, right? So what we can do is we can look at this as, well, I've got 1/2 the circumference, and I'm going to replace the C, the capital C, with the formula itself. Okay, so I could do half the 2 times the pi times the r. Okay. So if I were to cut this formula in half, because that's what I'm doing when I'm multiplying by 1/2, I can do 1/2 times 2 pi r. Well, 1/2 times 2, if we were to reduce this down, would be 2/2, right? 2/2 pi r, right? Okay. And if we reduce that down, 2 divided by 2 is actually 1. So I'd have 1 pi r, which, in other words, I have pi r. Okay. You can come say hi. Come on. Come here. Show them your cast. Come on. Come here. If you're gonna be in it, be in it.
I'm not going in that.
Okay, fine. Since when are you shy? All right. So my point being is, if we take the circumference formula and we cut it in half, we actually are only left, instead of 2 pi r, we have 1 pi r, which is just pi r. So that means that this edge of the rectangle that we created from the circle is just pi r. Okay. So the height we refer to as the radius, okay? The base is pi r, okay? So if I'm going to do the area of this rectangle, which is the same as the area of this circle, I would just take base times height, which in this case is pi r times r, okay? So when I multiply pi times r, I can actually reduce the r's, and we could just say that we're taking r, multiplying it by itself, which another way we say that is squared. We're squaring it. Okay, so we have pi squared. Or sorry, we have r squared. So we'll come and say hi. You're going to say hi. Come here. This is Kylie. You say hi, Kylie?
Hi.
So, all right. Say goodnight because you're going to bed.
Good night.
All right, love you. So like I said, when you multiply r by r, we're doing what we call r squared. Okay, and we bring down the pi. So our formula for finding the area of this rectangle, which is the same as the area of the circle, okay, is area equals pi times r, and we square it, okay? So I have some students who like to leave it this way, that like to leave it as pi times r times r. I just like to do pi r squared because that's the formula you'll be given when you get older, and that's a little bit easier to plug that into a calculator. There's a lot of reasons why we do that. So yeah, I'll run through that again. I know I got a little distracted. So you're telling me, man, like she's got to go to bed. She's got to let that arm heal. She broke her arm in 2 places. All right. So again, I'll explain this again. Now that it's all drawn, I'm facing the camera now. It might be a little easier to see. So again, I'm looking at this circle. All right. And if I slice this circle and I line up its edges alternating, I start to get closer to a parallelogram or a rectangle. Okay. And if I want to get closer to a rectangular shape, I have to cut these slices as small as possible, okay? So I've done that here, and the reason this is all red is because that's how many slices there are. And there's a video that I showed in class that's also in Google Classroom that shows the actual cutting of the circle and laying it out as a rectangle, okay? So that way we can say that the area of this circle is equal to the area of this rectangle, okay? So the area of this rectangle is going to be equal to the circle because I've just taken the circle, I've sliced it so many times that I can lay every piece out as a rectangle. All right, so if we look at our rectangle here, I'm going to erase all this junk. Okay, we have base times height, and that's how we find the area. For a rectangle, area of a rectangle equals base times height. Okay, so over here, I'm just calling those things something different because I'm trying to associate it with the circle. So when we cut the circle, the edge of it is the radius, right? Because if I'm cutting the circle into slices, into like pizza slices, okay, I'm creating a bunch of radii because they're all crossing through that center point. Okay, so this edge here would be this edge here, right? So if I'll draw it in purple. Okay, so this edge right here is the same as this one right here, right? So if this is a radius, then this is a radius. So again, if I keep cutting the circle into smaller slices, that radius is still going to be on the edge right here. Okay, so there's my R. All right, and then my base is going to be, well, here's the thing. I've got 4 edges of the circle here, and I have 4 edges of the circle up here, my circumference. Okay, so half of it's up here, the other half is down here. So I only need half the circumference to be my base, right? Because pi r is the same as saying I have half the circumference, okay? And I already talked about why that works, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. But basically, I have 2 pi r's to make the circumference. I only need one of those pi r's. So there it is. There's pi r, okay? So radius is the same as height, and pi r is the same as base. So I can use this formula to find the area of a circle just based on how this associates to the area of a square, or sorry, area of a rectangle, okay? So pi r squared is your formula for area, and that's what we're going to focus on these next couple of questions, okay? So this is what you'll need for that, and I'm going to go ahead and erase this, and again, you can always play this back if I lost you, and again, I'm always willing to explain things at least twice just because sometimes I say things kind of quickly or I'm not facing the camera, and so it can be hard to hear me. So there will be something associated with that on your test, and we have talked about it a great deal, so make sure we understand that concept of where the formula comes from, okay? And again, there's a video on Google Classroom that reminds you of this as well. So the last thing I'm going to do is start talking about finding the area from when you're given the radius, and then finding the area when you're given a diameter, okay? This video is going to be, I'm trying to keep it around 45 minutes. Usually they go about an hour, but again, this is a shorter test, so I'm trying to keep it between 30 to 45, but usually I'll stay as long as there's questions and as long as I can keep my eyes open. So, you know, when I start to get tired, that's usually when I shut it down. So doesn't mean you have to stick around the whole time either. If you've got the information you need, you're welcome to be done with the video. So, and again, it does save, so if there's something else you need to see. So, but again, let's get back to what we're doing with area, okay? So that's a pretty good circle. I think that's pretty awesome. Okay, so let's say I'm given a radius of, let's say they're giving me 7, and we'll call it meters, okay? So let's say they're giving me a radius of 7, and I have to find the area of the circle. So I have to figure out how much space this circle takes up, okay? So what I'm going to do, they're asking me about area, and again, I'm just saying this, but it would be written on your test, and you have to figure out whether you need area or circumference. Okay, so in this case, you're being asked about area. You need to identify the formula you need, which is area, and write it down, okay? So area equals pi r squared, okay? So the next step is I'm going to plug in what I know, which is the measurement of the radius, okay? So I'm going to bring everything down here. I don't know A. I know pi. I know r is equal to 7, and I know I'm going to square that, okay? So the next step tells us that we are going to solve what we can with or without a calculator, but so for me, I'm going to solve this 7 squared first. And again, I know my multiplication facts. I know 7 times itself. I know 7 times 7, which is 49. Okay, so area is going to equal 49, and I'm going to bring down the pi. Okay, so all I did was this. I squared 7. I got 49. Okay, and now my last step is I'm going to use my calculator, and I'm going to take 49, and I'm going to times it by 3.14. And the answer I get is, and if you're doing this along with me, make sure you get the same answer as me, 153.86. Okay, now my unit is meters, okay? But the difference here is I'm going to write meters squared because when I'm finding the area of any two-dimensional figure, I'm calculating 2 dimensions, okay? And so those 2 dimensions here are length and width. Even though we have a circle, we're still referring to a length and a width, okay? And again, that goes back to that rectangle diagram I just did. So, so that being said, if I'm talking about the 2 dimensions, the amount of space something takes up, I have to put a 2 over my units, and you will get marked off if we don't do this. So for area, it's always units squared. For circumference, it's always just the unit. Okay, so make sure you're doing that correctly so you can get the maximum amount of points on your test. Okay, so again, this is how we find area when we're given just the radius. So next we're going to move on to how to find the area when you're given the diameter, okay? So this is going to go away, all right? And again, you can always play it back if I'm going too fast, all right? But again, I do want to try to keep this video at a reasonable length, all right? So let's say they give us a diameter of, let's say it's 17, Okay, they give us the diameter. All right. So, and they're telling me I have to find the area of a circle given this diameter. Okay, so they asked me for the area. So I need area formula, and I'm going to write it down. Area equals pi r squared. Okay, but here's where things get a little interesting, is that I don't have a radius, and the formula is asking me for radius. Now, the biggest mistake I've seen my students make is they say, oh, I've got a number right here. I'll just plug it in. Okay, but we have to realize that this 17 is referring to the diameter of the circle, not the radius. Okay, so we find the diameter. Okay, the diameter is equal to 2 times the radius. Okay, and radius, I ran out of room. Radius is equal to half of the diameter. Okay, so that being said, if I take the diameter, which is 17, and I multiply it by 1/2, or even easier, okay, I can divide it by 2. All right, if I take the diameter and divide it in half, then I'll have a radius that I can now use in the formula. Okay, so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to take 17, I divide it by 2, and it should be, what, 8.5? Yeah, it's 8.5. Okay, so now I know that one of these radii is equal to 8.5. Okay, and again, we'll go with meters because it's easier, so they're meters. All right, so 8.5 is half of 17. And again, 17 is my diameter. And I divide that in half because the diameter is made up of 2 radii, okay, both of which are 8.5 meters. All right, so now I have my radius, okay? And now that I have that, I can now plug in what I know because now I know the radius. Okay, so area equals pi times 8.5 squared, okay? Now, I don't know my 0.5s as well as I used to here, so this one I am going to use a calculator for. So 8.5 times 8.5, or 8.5 squared. Okay, so my calculator can't do that. So I'm going to do 8.5 times 8.5 because that's what squared means, is that number times itself. So 8.5 times 8.5 is 72.25. Okay, so area equals 72.25, and I bring down the pi. I haven't used it yet. So now I'm going to take that number. I'm going to times it by 3.14 because, again, in 7th grade, we're not going to use the pi key. Well, you can use the pi key, but I recommend using 3.14 because, again, for 7th grade, that's all you'll need right now. Okay, and when I multiply that, I end up getting 226.865, and that would be meters squared because I'm dealing with area, which is 2 dimensions. Okay, so that line in the middle goes all the way across. Okay, so that would be my answer for the area when given the diameter. Okay, and again, there's going to be word problems on your test. I don't have the capacity to show you a word problem and then demonstrate it. So, but there's different ways to look at this to make it relate to you. So it depends on what you do or what what interests you. But so you might see an area or a circumference word problem on your test. Okay, so I'm going to give you one more, and we're going to use area, and we're going to have to kind of figure out what to do from here. Okay, so here's our circle. Okay, and actually, in the problem, they might not give you a circle. Okay, so here's a problem I ran into, and I'll show you a picture of what I'm talking about, just for credibility purposes. So recently I went paintballing. Okay, I don't know if you can see me there. I went paintballing with some friends. Okay, and they have different things that you can buy at the paintball store, at the paintball armory, okay, where I can buy like paintballs for, and I can buy a paint grenade. Okay, these things are cool because you can pop them and you can throw them somewhere and they'll spin and just spray paint. Because if you get paint on you, you're out of the game. Okay, so they were selling these paint grenades, and they said that it spins and it sprays paint up to 12 feet. Okay, so they're telling me that if I toss this paint grenade somewhere, okay, it'll spray. In any direction, it'll spray a distance of 12 feet. Okay, and so I'm trying to figure out if it's worth the money because if I know a bunch of people are clustered together, I could toss the paint grenade and get them all soaked in paint, and then I win, which is awesome. So, but I know that it's not just a distance of 12 feet in one direction. This thing spins and sprays paint everywhere. So that means that I can actually that's a terrible circle, but I can spray paint in a circle that's 12 feet, okay? So, because again, that paint grenade spins and it could spit paint in all this direction, okay? So I wanted to know, like, how much area could I cover in paint to make it worth the purchase of a paint grenade when I'm going paintballing, okay? So, yeah, I know. That's why, I'll tell you whether I bought it or not at the end here. So I want to know how much area is going to be coated in paint after I toss this thing, okay? So I just said I need to find the area that's going to get covered in paint. Well, then I'm going to need area formula because I'm talking about area, okay? So I got to make sense of what it is I'm trying to figure out, okay? So I need the area formula, okay? Now I got to figure out, did they give me the diameter or did they give me the radius? Well, the guy told me that it can spray up to 12 feet from where it is, which tells me that if it's the center, right, that's the paint grenade, then it can spray out from that in any direction 12 feet. So I have a radius, okay? So it's like I know some of you play like Call of Duty. I hear a lot of people talking about Black Ops, and they talk about the blast radius of something. Well, that means that from where that happens, outwards, that distance would be the radius, and then anything within that circle of destruction you don't want to be in those games, right? So kind of the same thing with the paint grenade here, okay? So that means 12 feet any direction from where it is, so that's my radius. So I'm going to plug that information in because I know it, okay? So pi times 12 squared, okay? Now, again, I know my multiplication facts. I know my 12s. I know 12 times 12, okay? Because, again, 12 squared means 12 times 12. 12 times 12 is 144, okay? So I'm going to do that in my head because I don't need a calculator for that. And if you do need a calculator for that, that's okay. But, again, you want to try to do as much as you can without the calculator. Sorry the video keeps glitching. Hopefully that stops. Sorry. All right, sorry I'm so loud. I'm being loud. Sorry, it's bedtime. So I'm going to finish this problem up, and then I'll answer any lingering questions. So I'm just going to take 144, and I'm going to multiply it by 3.14. And that's going to equal a total area of 452.16 square feet of potential paint coverage, okay? So long story short, to me, that's a worthy buy if I know I'm up against a bunch of people that are pretty good at this game. But, I figure that's kind of like a last stand kind of situation. So, because I don't want to get sprayed with paint either. I got to be 12 feet away from this thing. So hopefully I can toss it 12 feet. So that's just one example of like a practical use for circles, I guess. And again, the test will have a lot more practical ones. So just be ready to read those carefully and to understand what the problem is asking you and whether you're dealing with area or circumference and whether they're giving you the diameter or the radius, okay? And so we'll be doing a study guide tomorrow that will help us identify those things. So I know this is kind of an intro to that, and then tomorrow we're going to make sure we have that understood. We're going to make sure these formulas are solid, and then we're going to take our test on Friday. And again, this video will be available all the way until then. So I've got a couple minutes so I can answer some questions. So I'm looking at the chat directly, and if there's anything you want me to go over again or talk about really quick, I'm happy to do that. And I see that Miss Fitzgerald did a great job of tagging in and answering some questions for me, so I appreciate that, Miss Fitzgerald. What are we working on tomorrow? So like I said, we're going to do a review in class tomorrow. We're going to do some work with word problems so that we know how to identify which formula we need based on the information given to us in the problem. So let's see. So when you have a squared in an equation, it is in your answer. In this case, yes. If that helps you remember that, then that's a great strategy for helping you on this test. That's not always the case in other math, but in terms of circles, that's a fair hint you can use. What is due tomorrow for Khan Academy? So I see the student that asked me that, and you actually have there's a glitch with yours, so I'll work with you tomorrow. So, and I see Ms. Wiesner joined us, so very cool. Good to see you, Mrs. Wiesner. Yes, it does work. Thank goodness. I was worried about it. So, how many questions are on the test? I don't know offhand, but it's a 2-pager, so there'll be 2 pages worth of work to do. So, if you get the circumference first, would you just divide? Okay, I did say I would answer that. So, if you're running into this on Mathia, I'll go over it. But again, this isn't something that you're going to run into on your test. But if you can do this, then you know what you're doing with all these formulas, which is great, okay? So let's say they only give you the circumference of a circle, okay? So I'm going to take a circumference here really quick. I just need to, let's see. Okay, so let's say they give you this circumference. Let's say they say that the circumference equals 9.42, and they say find the area, okay? So what this is we have a lot of working backwards. Okay, so we have to do a lot of working backwards in order to get the information we need, because if we're going to find area equals pi r squared. So our main unknown there is the radius. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to work backwards to find the radius in order to solve a problem like this. All right, so they gave me the circumference, okay, which means I need to identify the formula I need here. So I need to use the circumference formula, okay? So circumference equals 2 pi r, okay? So I identified the formula I need. They gave me circumference. I'm going to use circumference formula to write it down, okay? Step 3, I'm going to plug in what I know. And what I know is the circumference. So for capital C here, I'm going to put 9.42 equals 2 pi r, okay? Now, this is, I'll show you kind of what you can do from here, okay? But you can do a couple of things with this, okay? You can use a different circumference formula when you don't know, okay? I usually prefer to do this, actually. I would use the diameter times pi formula whenever you're given the circumference, and I'll explain why, okay? So in this case, the circumference, 9.42, equals diameter times pi. So my only unknown right now is the diameter, okay? So now what I can do is I can undo the formula, okay? I can work backwards, okay? And I can get rid of things by doing the opposite operation, okay? So again, I want to isolate the variable. Remember, step 5 was isolate the variable. Well, now my variable has something attached to it, so it's not isolated right now. So if I want to isolate it, I have to do the opposite with what's attached, okay? So I have a pi attached to d. Okay, I'm multiplying d by pi. So if I'm multiplying by pi, what would be the opposite of multiplying by pi? Say it if you know it in the chat. I'll wait and give you an awkward stare. And the answer is somebody, anybody in the chat, come on. Thank you. Rosa from 6th period blue, job well done. I divide, okay, and I'm going to divide by pi. So if I'm multiplying by pi to get rid of it, I have to divide by pi, okay? But again, an equal sign means that things have to be imbalanced on both sides, okay? So if I do something to one side of the equation, I can do that as long as I do it to the other side to keep it equal. So if I divide it by pi here, I'm going to divide by pi here, okay? And again, I'm going to use 3.14. So if I take 9.42 and divide it by 3.14, okay, I now get 3 equals d. Okay, but now keep in mind that I have the diameter here, okay? So if I have the diameter and I need the radius, let's not forget that diameter equals 2 times the radius, which means I can take diameter and divide it by 2 to get the radius, okay? So if I take 3 and divide it by 2, that's going to be my radius. So that ends up being 1.5 for my radius, okay? So now I have the radius finally, right? All right. So then once I have the radius, I can plug it into my area formula. So pi r squared is my area formula. I'm going to plug in what I know, which now I know is r equals 1.5, and I'm going to square that. I'm going to do that right away. 1.5 times 1.5 is going to be 2.25, and I bring down the pi. All right, now I'm going to times that by 3.14. And my area of this circle is going to be 7.065. Okay, and I don't know what units, so I'm just going to say units squared. Okay. So anyway, so that's how you would work backwards. You basically have to look at it this way. I'm going to write this in a different color. So if you have the circumference, okay, circumference formula equals diameter times pi. Okay. So that being said, circumference divided by pi would then get you the diameter. Okay, so now you have the diameter. Okay, and this goes back to when we found the circumference formula, right? So now diameter, okay, I can divide this by 2 and I get the radius. Okay, and then I can plug r into the area formula. Okay. All right. So that's how we would tackle a problem like that. And again, you're not going to see that on your test, but you will see problems like that on Mathia, Khan Academy, and other types of practice that we use for Carnegie as well. So let me see. What if it doesn't give you the diameter or the radius? Well, they have to give you something. That's a great question. They have to give you something. So they'll either, on Mathia, they'll give you either the area or the circumference, have you find radius and diameter. For your test and for your study guide, you're going to be given the diameter or the radius and then be able to use that to work forwards. So yes, can you name it what you want, or is it okay? So when you draw your own circle, you don't have to name it. Okay, that's just for identification purposes. So that's not something I think you'll have to do on your test. You'll have to draw a circle, but you won't have to put a point there because we're not going to label pieces on the test. So I'm lost on area with circumference. Danny, like I said, don't worry about it because that's something that won't be on your test, and we can go over that in class. So I know, and I went over this here, so you can play it back. And again, this is just something that you'll see on other tools that we use. So don't get frustrated with it if you're having a hard time. So I can stick around for maybe 4 or 5 more minutes. So if there's any other questions with anything, again, this is more of like a bonus thing for Mathia and Khan Academy. This is not something that'll be on your test, so if you're worried about that, don't be. It looks like my light died. So, key to a good stream is having a good light. So if the light's dying, it probably means it's time for me to call it quits here. So any lingering questions before I get going here? Got it. Good night. Okay. All right. Seems like people are ready to wrap up here. So I'll give it another 30 seconds. If I don't see any other questions, I'll just go ahead and call it a night. But while I'm waiting, I hope that this was useful to you, and I hope that even if you watch it back again, that it's something that you can use to help improve your test grades. So love your class, but you lost me. Well, I'm sorry I lost you, but hey, at least you tuned in. So if you tuned in, then you're doing something extra to get yourself prepared for the test. And again, you can always play it back. So all right, looks like everyone's about ready to be done. Oh, did you buy the paint grenade? I did not. I chose not to because it was like $12, and it just seemed like, if it's not a guarantee, I mean, sure, it covered a large area, but if it's not a guarantee, I don't know. Because when you're spreading that much paint, when you're shooting it out 12 feet, you're probably not covering that entire area in paint. So I decided that, I'm probably not going to get the most out of that investment. So, all right, well, I'm going to sign off. This will save. And again, if you're watching it the next day, hopefully it's as useful as it was today. So have a good evening, guys. Good luck on your test, and see you tomorrow.